They thought I'd beg when he left me after 30 years of marriage, but he didn't know I'd already seen his text messages. My hands trembled as I scrolled through their intimate conversations, plans for their life after I was discarded, all while he slept beside me. The blue light from his phone cast shadows on his peaceful face. He looked so ordinary, so familiar, yet suddenly like a stranger. His phone pinged with her message about Thanksgiving plans. They'd celebrate their first holiday together after he finally broke free. 3 weeks from today. I nearly dropped the phone. 3 weeks. That was his timeline. That was how long I had left in what I thought was my life. I placed his phone exactly where I found it, turned away, and in that moment, decided my flight would leave the same day as his carefully rehearsed goodbye speech. Ever been betrayed by family? Comment below. The morning after discovering the texts, I maintained our routine perfectly. His coffee with exactly 1 teaspoon of sugar, his pressed shirt laid out, while mentally cataloging what I would and wouldn't take with me. My hands didn't shake anymore. Something had hardened inside me overnight, like concrete setting. Richard kissed my cheek absently, the same way he had for years, completely unaware that I now recognized it as the performance it had always been. Had it always felt this empty? This mechanical? Or had I just never allowed myself to notice? The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I called Susan, my college roommate who'd been through her own divorce battle years earlier. I hadn't spoken to her in months. Richard never liked her. Too outspoken, too honest about what she saw in our marriage. Don't confront him yet, she advised immediately, understanding the stakes before I'd even finished explaining. You need a strategy, not just an emotional reaction. Her voice was clear, steady, the voice of someone who'd walked this path before and survived. That afternoon, I visited our bank and discovered accounts I didn't know existed. His financial betrayal had begun long before his emotional one. The amounts were staggering. Years of hiding money while telling me we needed to budget more carefully. The banker's pitying look told me she'd seen this scenario before. The wife, last to know, scrambling to protect herself while maintaining appearances. Her eyes said what her words couldn't, that women like me came in every day. Shocked to discover financial secrets, I withdrew exactly half of our joint account, not a penny more, and opened a new account at a different bank in my name only. The new bank card felt strange in my wallet, like an escape hatch I'd never thought to build. At home, I cataloged the possessions that were truly mine. The inheritance jewelry from my mother, photo albums he'd never glance at, books he'd mocked me for reading. I touched each item, really seeing them for the first time in years, recognizing pieces of myself in these things he'd dismissed. Each night, I removed one small, meaningful item and stored it at Susan's house. A breadcrumb trail of my planned escape that Richard never noticed. A silver frame here, a favorite mug there, small enough that their absence wouldn't register to someone who barely saw them anyway. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney recommended by Susan, bringing copies of financial records and screenshots of the text messages. The attorney's office was warm, with comfortable chairs instead of the intimidating leather and chrome I'd expected. "You're more prepared than most clients who come through that door," the attorney said, impressed by my methodical approach to a situation that typically produces only chaos. Her approval felt strange. I wasn't used to being praised for my competence. I learned that Richard had a consultation with the city's most aggressive divorce attorney, not to hire him, but to create a conflict of interest preventing me from doing so. The attorney explained this was a common tactic among controlling spouses. One more manipulation I hadn't seen coming. That night, as we ate dinner in our usual silence, I realized how long we'd been performing this play of a marriage, with neither of us truly present. The chicken was dry. The vegetables were bland. Had our meals always been this tasteless, or was I just now allowing myself to notice? I caught him watching me with calculation in his eyes, rehearsing his departure speech in his mind, wondering which approach would most effectively devastate me. I recognized that look now, the one he wore when preparing to close a difficult business deal. I was just another transaction to manage. I smiled warmly in response, playing my role perfectly, the unsuspecting wife, while mentally reviewing the flight confirmation email I'd received that morning. The destination I'd chosen was a place I'd always wanted to see, a city he'd dismissed as having nothing of value to offer. Would you have confronted him immediately, or planned silently like she did? Tell us your thoughts. Richard mentioned Thanksgiving casually over breakfast. Should we invite the kids, or keep it small this year? Testing whether I suspected what he'd planned for that day. His voice was too casual, his eyes too focused on my reaction, looking for cracks in my performance. I suggested we invite them, knowing neither of us would be there when the day arrived, adding that I'd make his mother's special stuffing recipe that he'd always praised publicly but criticized privately. I even added that I'd try to get it right this time, playing into his narrative of my inadequacy. My wedding ring felt increasingly heavy, a shackle rather than a symbol, but I wore it faithfully to maintain the illusion that sustained my preparations. Sometimes I'd twist it absently, feeling the groove it had worn into my skin over 3 decades. The attorney called with unexpected news. Richard had been transferring small amounts to a separate account for years, building a safety net while keeping me financially dependent. The amounts were clever, never enough to trigger alerts, but substantial when accumulated over time. I should have felt betrayed by this discovery, but instead felt an odd sense of validation. The gut feelings I'd dismissed for years hadn't been paranoia after all. All those times I'd questioned our finances and been told I was being emotional or irrational, I'd been right all along. Susan helped me secure a short-term rental in a city I'd always wanted to explore, a place Richard had refused to visit because it held no networking opportunities for him. The lease was for 6 months, enough time to figure out where I really wanted to be, rather than where I'd been placed. I updated my resume, surprised by how many skills I'd developed managing our life while Richard built his career, skills he'd consistently diminished as just housework. Event planning, budget management, conflict resolution, project coordination, all valuable, all marketable, all invisible to him. Each day became a careful balance of preparing for my new life, while playing my role in the old one, a performance Richard never questioned because he'd never truly seen me. The invisible woman has one advantage. She can move mountains while no one notices. I noticed Richard taking more calls outside, coming home with practiced conversation starters, setting the stage for what he thought would be my complete emotional collapse. "You seem distant lately," he said one evening, testing the waters, preparing to make my emotional state the reason for his departure. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, he mentioned casually that we should make it special this year. The irony of his performance almost made me laugh out loud. The way he emphasized special with fake sincerity nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. I agreed enthusiastically, suggesting we use the good china that had been my grandmother's, knowing I'd already carefully packed the pieces I cherished most. "Let's go all out," I said, as if it's our last holiday together. His momentary confusion was almost worth the pain of the situation. That night, I overheard him on the phone with her. "She doesn't suspect a thing. It'll be clean and quick, and I'll be with you by dinner time." His voice was different when he spoke to her, more animated, more genuine than any tone he'd used with me in years. I bit my tongue until it nearly bled, maintaining the facade that kept him confidently walking into the trap of his own making. The metallic taste in my mouth seemed fitting, the cost of silence, the price of strategic patience. The next morning, I finalized the last details: forwarding address for important mail, digital copies of essential documents, closing subscriptions tied to our shared address. Each completed task was another thread cut from the web that had held me in place for so long. Susan asked if I was scared to start over at 58, and I realized my fear of the unknown had finally become smaller than my fear of wasting more years in a marriage that existed only in appearance. "I'm more afraid of staying than leaving," I told her, surprising myself with the truth of it. I caught Richard practicing his sympathetic expression in the bathroom mirror, the face he planned to wear while telling me our marriage was over and watching me crumble, the gentle furrowing of his brow, the practiced tilt of his head, all designed to appear caring while delivering maximum damage. I practiced my own expression in a different mirror, calm acceptance with just a hint of relief, rehearsing for the moment his script would derail against my unexpected reaction. I didn't need to fake anything. The relief was already there, waiting to be acknowledged. A week before Thanksgiving, Richard began leaving divorce pamphlets around the house, his idea of subtle preparation for what he thought would blindside me completely. They appeared on the coffee table on the kitchen counter, little landmines meant to destabilize me gradually. I let him find me reading one, performing mild confusion, asking innocently if they belonged to a friend, watching him stammer through an explanation that we could discuss later. His momentary panic was revealing. He wasn't ready for me to find them too soon before his script was ready. 5 days before Thanksgiving, he scheduled a special dinner for us, marking the calendar with deliberate casualness, setting the stage for his grand finale. "Just the two of us," he said, with what he thought was meaningful emphasis. "We need to talk." I confirmed my flight for the same evening, packed my essential suitcase, and moved it to Susan's house during his golf game, the final piece of my counter-strategy. The suitcase was surprisingly small. How little I needed to take from this life to begin the next one. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I overheard him practicing his speech in his home office. "Donna, we've grown apart. You must have noticed. I deserve happiness." Each phrase carefully crafted to place the blame on circumstance rather than his choices. Each practiced line revealed how little he knew me after 3 decades, how completely he'd replaced the real me with a convenient character who existed only in his mind. The woman he was preparing to devastate wasn't me. She was a fiction he'd created to justify his actions. I wrote my own speech, not of accusations, but of simple facts, each word shedding the weight of pretense I'd carried for years without realizing how heavy it had become. No dramatics needed. The truth was damning enough without embellishment. The night before our special dinner, Richard was unusually attentive, laying groundwork for what he thought would be a devastating contrast the following evening. He brought wine I didn't particularly like, commented on my appearance for the first time in months, asked about my day with manufactured interest. I accepted his sudden attention with the same pleasant smile I'd perfected over years, while mentally checking off final preparations for my departure. I'd already said private goodbyes to the house, touching door frames, looking out windows one last time, acknowledging the life I'd lived there. The divorce papers sat in my purse, the weight of them somehow lighter than the emptiness of our marriage had become. 3 copies, all requiring his signature. The attorney had explained each page carefully, ensuring I understood exactly what I was asking for, nothing more or less than fair. That night I removed my wedding ring while Richard slept, surprised by how my hand felt lighter without it after 30 years. The pale band of skin it left behind would fade, I knew. Everything fades eventually, even the marks we think are permanent. The morning of our special dinner, Richard suggested I wear the blue dress he'd always complimented, his attempt at manufacturing a painful memory for me to carry. "You always look beautiful in that one," he said, the compliment hollow in its obvious manipulation. I wore it without comment, adding the earrings his mother had given me on our wedding day, a final nod to the family connections that had meant more to me than to him. His mother had warned me once in her gentle way. I should have listened, but I'd been too young to understand her quiet caution. Richard came home early, bringing flowers he'd never bothered to learn I was allergic to. A perfect picture of our marriage. "Your favorites," he said, handing me the lilies that would make my eyes water and my skin itch. I'd told him about this allergy every year of our marriage. He'd made reservations at the restaurant where we'd celebrated our 25th anniversary, a detail he thought would maximize my emotional devastation when he ended things. It was an expensive place with low lighting and private booths, perfect for the scene he planned to create. I sat across from him at dinner, watching him check his watch repeatedly, timing his speech for maximum impact before his evening flight with Nicole. He'd ordered champagne to arrive at precisely 7:30. I'd seen the note in his calendar while pretending to look for a pen in his office. The waiter brought champagne Richard had pre-ordered, to soften the blow, as I'd later learned from the restaurant staff who'd witnessed similar scenes before. The waiter's eyes held a knowing sympathy as he placed the glasses down. He'd seen this scene play out at other tables. Have you ever shocked someone who underestimated you? Share your story in the comments. Richard cleared his throat, reached for my hand across the table, and began the speech he'd practiced for weeks. "Donna, I think we both know things haven't been right between us for some time." His tone was gentle, reasonable, the voice of someone making a difficult but necessary decision. I let him continue, watching with detached fascination as he delivered line after rehearsed line, each meant to absolve him while devastating me. His delivery was flawless. He'd clearly practiced each pause, each sympathetic tilt of his head, each carefully chosen word. "I'll always care for you, but I need to be true to myself," he said, his eyes searching mine for the tears he expected, confused by their absence. I wondered briefly if he actually believed these lines, these clichés designed to make betrayal sound like personal growth. "I've tried to make this work, but we've become different people," he continued, his confidence faltering slightly as my expression remained calm, almost serene. He paused, waiting for the interruption that didn't come. The protests, the questions, the beginning of the begging he anticipated. He reached the carefully crafted conclusion of his speech. "I think we should end our marriage. I've already found a place of my own. I'm sure you'll be okay eventually." The word "eventually" was particularly cruel, suggesting a long, painful recovery that he'd graciously considered. The restaurant around us continued its normal hum of conversation, unaware of the moment unfolding at our table, a moment Richard had scripted but could no longer control. Silverware clinked against plates, waiters glided between tables. Life continued while my marriage officially ended. I took a sip of water, letting silence fill the space where my breakdown was supposed to occur, watching confusion replace satisfaction in his eyes. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, I had the power of the unexpected. "Aren't you going to say anything?" he finally asked, his script derailed by my failure to play the devastated wife begging for reconciliation. His voice had an edge now, irritation breaking through the practiced sympathy. I smiled gently, reaching for my purse. "Actually, Richard, I am. But not what you're expecting." My voice was steady, calmer than I'd anticipated. The weeks of preparation had done their work. I was ready for this moment. His eyes narrowed with the first flicker of genuine emotion I'd seen from him in years. Uncertainty, an unfamiliar sensation for a man accustomed to controlling every situation. A small vertical line appeared between his eyebrows, the tell he had when deals weren't going his way. I placed my phone on the table between us, open to the screenshots of his text messages with Nicole, dated 6 months back. I didn't say anything. The messages spoke for themselves. Their plans, their jokes at my expense, their countdown to my disposal. The color drained from his face as he realized that his carefully constructed narrative had collapsed before he could even fully deliver it. His mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. "How did you—" he began, but I raised my hand, stopping him mid-sentence, taking control of a conversation for perhaps the first time in our marriage. The gesture itself felt foreign but satisfying, a simple raising of my palm that silenced him completely. "I know about the account transfers too," I said quietly. "The ones you've been making for the past 3 years. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or did you simply not care if I did?" My question wasn't accusatory. I was genuinely curious about which type of dismissal I'd lived with. He stammered through the beginning of an explanation, his prepared script useless now, forced to improvise in a situation he hadn't anticipated. Richard had always been poor at improvisation. He needed preparation, control, predictable responses. I removed the divorce papers from my purse and placed them beside his untouched champagne glass. "I've taken the liberty of starting the process. My lawyer will contact yours tomorrow." The papers made a soft sound as they landed on the tablecloth, such a small noise for such a momentous thing. His face flushed with anger, not at being caught, but at being outmaneuvered. "You went behind my back?" he demanded, without a trace of irony. In his world, only he was allowed the privilege of secretive planning. "I learned from an expert," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. 30 years of watching you operate has been quite educational." The words weren't meant to wound, just to state a simple truth we both now understood. He glanced around the restaurant, suddenly aware of potential witnesses to his humiliation. "We should discuss this at home," he said, attempting to regain control. The public setting, his chosen stage for my devastation, had become a liability rather than an asset. "There's nothing to discuss," I said, placing my house key on the table. "By the way, you should call Nicole. Her flight leaves in 3 hours, and you might want to tell her you'll be traveling alone." The key made a small metallic sound against the wood. Another chapter closing. His face revealed everything. Shock that I knew about the flights, panic at his collapsing plans, and dawning realization that he'd completely misjudged the woman he'd lived with for 3 decades. For the first time since I'd known him, Richard was completely transparent. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice small now, the powerful businessman suddenly uncertain as his script disintegrated around him. The question wasn't concerned. It was baffled, as though he couldn't imagine me existing outside the frame he'd built around me. I stood, smoothing the blue dress he'd specifically requested I wear for this occasion. "That's no longer your concern, Richard. Not everything is about you." The dress felt different now, reclaimed rather than weaponized against me. His face when she handed him the papers. Can you imagine? Hit subscribe to see more moments of justice. As I walked toward the restaurant exit, I heard him call my name. Not in anger, but with a note of desperation I'd never heard before. The unfamiliar tone almost made me turn around. Almost. I didn't turn back. Not out of cruelty, but because I was finally moving forward after decades of standing still. My steps were steady, my back straight. The restaurant door felt surprisingly light as I pushed it open. Susan waited in her car outside, just as we'd planned, ready to drive me to the airport with my single suitcase containing everything I needed for my new beginning. Her smile when she saw me was warm, genuine, a reminder of what real connection felt like. "How do you feel?" she asked as we pulled away, Richard visible in the restaurant window, still seated alone at our table, phone in hand. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his certainty, his script now useless in his hands. "Light," I answered truthfully. "Like I've set down something heavy I've been carrying so long I forgot it wasn't part of me." The words came easily, a perfect description of the strange weightlessness I felt despite the magnitude of what I'd just done. My phone began ringing. Richard, then our children, then Richard again. Each call representing threads of a life I was consciously choosing to reweave rather than abandon. I silenced the ringer, promising myself I'd address each call when I was ready, not when they demanded. I texted our children the simple truth, that their father and I were separating, that I was taking some time away, and that I would call them when I was settled. No accusations, no details, just the facts they needed for now. The rest could wait. Richard's texts alternated between anger and negotiation, revealing more about our marriage in those few minutes than he'd shown me in years. Threats followed by apologies, demands followed by promises. The full spectrum of manipulation techniques deployed in rapid succession. As we approached the airport, one final text arrived from him. "What about Thanksgiving? The kids are expecting us." The irony of his concern for appearances even now made me laugh out loud. A genuine laugh that surprised even me with its lightness. The airport was crowded with holiday travelers, families reuniting, couples embarking on vacations. Once, I would have felt alone among them. Now, I felt like part of something larger, people in motion, lives in transition, everyone headed somewhere new. At the departure gate, Susan hugged me tightly, whispering, "The hardest part is done. Now comes the good part, finding out who you are without him defining you." Her words settled into me, a truth I was just beginning to understand. The boarding process was routine. Ticket scanned, smile from the gate agent, the familiar narrow aisle of the airplane. But everything felt new, significant. Each step was taking me further from the life I'd known and closer to one I would create. As the plane took off, I watched my wedding ring in the small bag I'd placed it in, no longer a symbol of commitment, but of a chapter completed. Through the plane window, the city lights grew smaller, then disappeared altogether as we rose above the clouds. They never expect strength when they've only seen sacrifice. Share this with someone who needs to hear this today. My first week in the new city passed in a blur of practical matters. Setting up my rental apartment, exploring my neighborhood, beginning the job hunt I'd prepared for. Each task, however mundane, felt different when done solely for myself, according to my own preferences. The apartment was smaller than our house, of course, but filled with light in a way our grand, shadowy rooms never were. I arranged the few belongings I'd brought with me, each one chosen deliberately, each one meaningful in ways Richard would never have understood. Richard's lawyer contacted mine with increasingly generous offers meant to entice me back into negotiations in person, transparent attempts to regain control of the situation. Each offer revealed more about what Richard thought would motivate me: money, the house, social standing. I instructed my lawyer to proceed as planned: fair division of assets. Nothing more or less than what 30 years of partnership entitled me to under law. No punitive demands, no emotional leverage, just a clean, fair separation based on facts rather than feelings. My children's reactions revealed how much they'd absorbed their father's worldview. Initial shock that I'd left, followed by awkward attempts to convince me to be reasonable. Their concern seemed focused more on disruption to their image of family than on my well-being. "I am being reasonable," I told my daughter during our first video call. "For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I'm prioritizing my well-being over everyone else's comfort." Her face registered surprise. This wasn't the accommodating mother she was accustomed to. My son called next, his approach more direct. "Dad's a mess. You really blindsided him. Couldn't you have handled this differently?" His tone was accusatory, protective of his father in a way that revealed whose narrative he'd accepted without question. "Ask your father about Nicole," I suggested gently. "Ask him about their Thanksgiving plans. Then we can discuss who blindsided whom." I didn't elaborate. The facts would speak for themselves if he chose to look at them. The silence that followed told me everything they'd known or suspected, and had chosen the comfort of ignoring it over the discomfort of acknowledging their father's betrayal. Their complicity wasn't malicious, just human. The path of least resistance is always tempting. Thanksgiving Day arrived with unexpected peace. My small rental kitchen filled with the scent of a simple meal I'd prepared just for myself, a celebration rather than an absence. I'd made my favorite foods rather than Richard's, played music he would have criticized, used the good dishes just because I wanted to. I received a picture from Richard's sister, the family Thanksgiving gathering with conspicuous empty chairs where Richard and I should have been. Nicole nowhere in sight. The photo was clearly meant to induce guilt, to show me what I'd ruined by not playing my assigned role. "Where are you?" his sister texted. "Richard won't say what happened, just that you've lost your mind. Are you okay?" The concern seemed genuine enough, though colored by Richard's version of events, the only one they'd heard. I sent back a photo of myself raising a glass on my new balcony, sunset behind me, with the simple caption, "Never better. Happy Thanksgiving." The photo wasn't staged or filtered, just an honest moment of contentment that would speak for itself. The responses trickled in throughout the evening. Confusion from some, quiet support from others who perhaps recognized something in my smile they hadn't seen in years. Richard's brother called, the only one brave enough to ask directly what had happened. I told him the simple truth, without bitterness or accusation, that Richard had planned to leave me for another woman on Thanksgiving, but I had discovered the plan and chosen to leave on my own terms instead. The silence on the other end was telling. Not disbelief, but recognition. By Christmas, I had secured a position using my accounting background, ironically at a higher salary than Richard had ever allowed me to pursue during our marriage. The work was challenging in the best way, using skills I'd honed managing our household finances but never been credited for. My new colleagues knew nothing of my past. To them, I was simply Donna, competent and professional, with occasional wit that surprised them. Not Richard's wife, not the kid's mother, just Donna. The freedom of that simple identity was intoxicating. The divorce proceeded without drama, my preparation removing the leverage Richard had assumed he would maintain throughout the process. My attorney seemed almost disappointed by the lack of conflict. Apparently, she rarely saw cases resolve so smoothly when so much was at stake. I learned from mutual friends that Nicole had ended their relationship after witnessing his reaction to losing control of our divorce narrative, recognizing a pattern she didn't want to become part of. I felt no satisfaction in this news, only a distant hope that it might prompt some reflection. Each month brought new discoveries, not just about practical independence, but about preferences and passions I'd subdued for so long they felt almost like those of a stranger. Colors I actually liked, foods I genuinely enjoyed, opinions I'd buried to maintain peace. I began volunteering at a women's financial literacy program, finding purpose in helping others navigate systems designed to keep them dependent. The gratitude in their eyes when they understood how to read a contract or balance a budget reminded me of my own journey toward financial clarity. On the anniversary of our special dinner, I received an email from Richard, the first direct communication in months that wasn't through attorneys. The notification appeared on my phone during lunch with new friends, a small digital intrusion from the past into my present. "I didn't know you," he wrote. "I realize that now. I created a version of you that served my narrative and never bothered to look beyond it. I'm sorry." The words were simple, unexpected in their lack of manipulation or agenda. They sat in my inbox for hours while I considered their meaning. I sat with his words for days before responding with the simple truth. "I didn't fully know myself either. Thank you for the apology. I hope you find peace. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement of his apology, of our shared humanity, of the possibility of growth for us both." As the second Thanksgiving approached, my children suggested visiting my new home, an olive branch I accepted with cautious optimism. The invitation came from my daughter first, tentative and awkward, but genuine in its reaching out. We prepared the meal together in my kitchen, the conversation awkward at first, then gradually warming as they encountered their mother as a person rather than a role. They noticed new things about me, opinions, preferences, strengths they'd overlooked when I existed primarily as background to their father. "You seem different," my daughter observed as we washed dishes together. "Happier somehow. More present." Her observation wasn't accusatory but wondering, as though she was seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time. "I am present," I confirmed. "For perhaps the first time since before you were born, I'm fully present in my own life." The words weren't meant to induce guilt, but to share a truth I was still coming to terms with myself. How completely I'd absented myself from my own existence. That night, after they'd gone, I looked at old photos of our family, not with regret, but with recognition that what had ended wasn't just a marriage, but a performance that had exhausted us all. The woman in those photos was familiar yet distant, someone I'd been rather than someone I was. Susan called to check in, as she still did weekly despite the distance. "Any regrets?" she asked, as she always did. The question had become a ritual between us, a way of marking progress, of affirming choices. "Not about leaving," I answered honestly. "Only about staying so long that leaving became necessary." The distinction was important. I didn't regret the marriage itself, the children it had produced, the moments of genuine connection amid the pretense. I regretted only the years of diminishment. The following spring, I received an invitation to Richard's wedding to someone I'd never heard of. A peace offering or a point being made, I wasn't sure which. The envelope was thick, expensive. The invitation inside embossed with silver and cream, formal in its wording. I sent a simple card wishing them happiness, genuine in my hope that he had learned enough to build something real this time. Not for his sake alone, but for hers. For the woman who didn't know yet whether she was marrying Richard or just the role he needed her to play. My own social life had expanded gradually, not through dating, which held little appeal after 30 years of marriage, but through friendships that nourished rather than depleted me. People who knew me as I was now, not as the character I'd played in my previous life. I traveled to places Richard had always dismissed as impractical or unimpressive, discovering that my own enjoyment was the only metric that mattered. Small coastal towns, art museums in unfashionable cities, hiking trails without prestigious views, each chosen solely for my interest in them. On the second anniversary of what Richard had planned as my devastation, I realized I hadn't thought of that day in months. The weight of it completely lifted. The date had passed without recognition, without ceremony, without pain. Just another day in a life that was fully mine. My new home felt more mine than our house ever had, filled with colors Richard would have vetoed, and books displayed proudly rather than hidden away. Nothing matched perfectly. Nothing was chosen for effect or status. Everything served either function or joy, preferably both. People often asked if I was lonely, unable to imagine being happily unmarried after decades of partnership. The question revealed more about their fears than my reality. The terror of being uncoupled, unattached, undefined by relation to another. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely, I would explain. I was far more lonely in my marriage than I've ever been since leaving it. This answer often produced uncomfortable silence, a truth too direct for casual conversation but necessary nonetheless. The question I'm asked most often is whether I've forgiven Richard, as though that's the expected final chapter of a woman's journey after betrayal, as though my story isn't complete without the grace note of absolution, the tidy conclusion of wounds healed through transcendent generosity. The truth is more nuanced than forgiveness or its absence. I've released the anger without absolving the actions, carrying forward the lessons while setting down the pain. Forgiveness implies an accounting between victim and perpetrator. I'm no longer interested in either role. 3 years after that special dinner, I understand now what I couldn't see then, that his leaving wasn't happening to me, but for me. Not because he intended it as a gift, but because sometimes our worst moments become doorways to our best possibilities. The greatest gift of starting over wasn't freedom from a broken marriage, but freedom from the person I'd become within it, accommodating to the point of disappearance. The woman who checked her opinions at the door, who shrunk her dreams to fit within margins set by others, who measured her worth by her usefulness. People expect women my age to fear being discarded, to cling to marriages that exist only in form, to believe that half of someone is better than all of no one. The narrative is so persistent that breaking from it feels almost radical, an act of defiance rather than simple self-preservation. What I've learned is that we don't have to accept the endings others write for us. We can rewrite them as beginnings if we're brave enough to hold the pen. Our stories don't conclude with abandonment, with disposal, with betrayal. Those are merely plot points, not conclusions. I don't regret the 30 years that gave me my children and countless moments of genuine joy amid the pretense. To regret the marriage entirely would be to regret too much of my life, too many experiences that shaped me, too many connections that remain valuable despite their complicated origins. I only wish I'd understood sooner that the opposite of love isn't hate but indifference, and that being valued is not the same as being loved. Perhaps then I would have recognized the subtle replacements. Appreciation exchanged for appraisal, partnership for performance, connection for convenience. When Richard planned our last dinner, he expected to be the author of my story's end, never imagining he was instead its reluctant catalyst. That's the irony of manipulation. Its success depends on predictable responses from people who have ceased to know themselves. He thought I would beg when he left me, but he didn't know that his leaving would be my liberation. Not because being alone is preferable to being married, but because authenticity is essential to being fully alive, and I had compromised mine for far too long. Starting over is scary, but staying where you're not valued is scarier. And recognizing the difference is perhaps the most important lesson I've learned. The unknown ahead holds more promise than the familiar behind, when the familiar has become a prison of politeness, a cage of compromise. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. Starting over is scary, but staying where you're not valued is scarier. Comment if this inspired you.